My daughter who went missing 3 years ago just showed up on my doorstep. Part 2. Sarah was a beautiful, smart, and happy little girl. As new parents, everything we did revolved around her. I couldn't wait to get home from work just so I could hold her. Hannah, as exhausted as she was, loved the late-night feedings because she got extra time with the baby. We bought toys and clothes for her every time we ran to the store. We were completely under her spell, which is why we found it so strange that very few people actually wanted to interact with her. Both our mothers came down to visit during the weeks after Sarah was born, each simply bubbling over with excitement about meeting their new granddaughter, but neither of them stayed in the house for more than an hour, and only 5 minutes or so was spent holding the baby. Strangers would actively avoid looking at her, and nobody, not once, ever stopped us to say how adorable our baby was. We hadn't noticed these things at first. The thing with our mothers had definitely rubbed us the wrong way, but the avoidance in public, the sideways glances from people at the store, the way our neighbors never seemed to visit anymore, all took time to finally come together to form the complete picture. People simply wanted nothing to do with Sarah, and for no reason at all that we could understand. We took her to the doctor on a regular basis to track her growth and development, and every time the doctor and nursing staff would do everything they could to get in and out of the room as quickly as possible. Eventually I brought it up that they always seemed to be in a rush, and although the doctor fed us a line about how busy he was, the nurse told me after he left that the room felt weird. She said she had no idea why, but when she walked into the room she was reminded of when she was a little girl and had to go fetch something for her mother from the basement. She said profusely that it was nothing to do with us or our darling little girl, but Hannah and I had begun to suspect the truth by that point, and we knew that the nurse was just being polite. I'd be lying if I said this didn't bother us, but we told ourselves that people would come around eventually, and if they didn't, then fuck them. It was when Sarah was around 3 that we began to feel for ourselves that there was something different about her. We'd long since come to terms with the fact that she made people uncomfortable, but it was at this time we actually dipped our own toes into that pool. Anyone who has been around toddlers can attest that even the best-behaved children can be a handful at times. They want to be independent, they want to make their own decisions, but often lack the skills to do so. Although there was a lot that seemed different about Sarah from the beginning, this was not one of those differences. She yearned for independence and defiantly disagreed with just about anything we told her. This went on for some time, and Hannah and I were beginning to approach a method of maneuvering around these disagreements, when Sarah threw us a curveball that changed everything. She started arguing and throwing fits before we had said anything. Hannah first noticed it during an argument with Sarah over what we were having for dinner. I was still at work while Hannah was working out whether we should have grilled chicken or pork chops. She had gotten up to open the freezer when Sarah came running into the kitchen and said she didn't want chicken or pork chops, she wanted pancakes for dinner. Hannah laughed this off and told Sarah that we'd have pancakes another night, which of course quickly turned into stomping feet and red-faced tears and a timeout in her bedroom. Hannah had told me later that night that the strange thing that struck her wasn't that Sarah had known what she was about to do, but it was the peculiar feeling she got just before it happened. She said she felt a strange sense of unease wash over her, like she imagines a gazelle gets when it senses a lion approaching. I felt the same thing while I was changing the oil in the car a few weeks later. I had forgotten to grab the fuel filter wrench and was about to slide out from under the car to get it when I was suddenly stricken by an overwhelming sense of dread. I quickly slid out from under the car, worried that the jack would fail and I'd be crushed, when I saw Sarah approaching me with the tool in her hand. She smiled and said, "Here you go, Daddy," holding back a shudder. I thanked her, kissed her forehead, and she went back into the house to watch cartoons. A broken bar. The past couple days after Sarah arrived back have been some of the most stressful days of our lives. We've done everything we can to be the parents she remembered us to be, and not the parents who had killed her and left her body in the desert. The hardest part is that we can't even think about that night or how terrified we are. We have to keep thinking about how happy we are to have her home and how sad we had been when she was gone. and there is absolutely no margin for error. Sarah's story, as she told us over breakfast, was full of blind spots and holes. She remembered sitting down to dinner with us. We had picked up burgers from her favorite restaurant down the street, and she remembers going to bed, but after that it's all completely blank. The next thing she recalls was stumbling around naked in the desert, finding a road and eventually being picked up by a truck driver and given a ride to the truck stop 25 miles away where she stayed the night. The next morning she started off to find us. She didn't tell us how she found us, and we didn't ask. I'm not sure she would be able to answer the question, and if she could I don't think I want to know the answer anyway. Hannah and I took turns spending time with her while the other went out under the guise of running errands, picking up clothes, ordering a bed, buying groceries, but the honest truth was that we needed to distance ourselves from the constant thrum of unease that followed Sarah wherever she went. Even when she was younger, sleeping in the same house as Sarah was difficult, especially with that distinct feeling of impending danger spread thin across every room. We hadn't always felt that way, but the older she got the more that feeling deepened. Now that she's 16 and we're out of practice, the feeling is almost unbearable. We feel like mice trying to rest while a cat sleeps across the hall. After what happened last night, we know that the nights are going to be significantly worse. I hadn't been asleep for long before I was startled awake by a loud thump. Hannah awoke as well and we sat up together searching the bedroom for the source of the sound. I was reminded vividly of a night from when Sarah was 10 or so and a few birds had pelted the house, waking us up in similar fashion. Sarah had feigned innocence, however she'd been quiet all afternoon and Hannah and I suspected she'd had a run-in with some of the neighbor kids earlier that day. Another loud thump shook the house. It was a hollow, hard sound, like a fist pounding on our bedroom wall. We exchanged a look, then quickly got out of bed and went to the room next door where Sarah slept. My heart pounded in my chest as we both paused before opening the door. We knew that nothing good could come of opening the door, but the alternative could be far worse. Another loud thump, then another. They were getting faster and there was a strange crackling sound that came with the last one that turned my pulse up another notch. I threw the door open and flipped on the light. I first noticed that Sarah's bed was empty, then that she stood with her back against the wall this room shared with our bedroom. She had a twisted Cheshire grin on her face that was so tight it looked painful. The tendons in her neck stood out like cords and her throat bulged from the pressure of it all, but the smile stopped at her mouth. Her eyes looked like they had been made of glass. We stepped into the room and Sarah thumped the back of her head hard against the wall. The crackling I'd heard had been drywall that I now saw breaking from the spot where her head collided and speckling her bare feet with dust. "Sarah, what are you?" Hannah asked, but was cut off by another thump, then another. Sarah sped up, hitting her head against the drywall as fast as she could. I rushed over to her and pulled her away. Her body was rigid, but relaxed as I laid her back down on the air mattress. She looked up at me then. The glass in her eyes was gone and for a brief moment I could see my baby girl in them. Seeing the faint reflection of the past in those eyes made my heart feel like it weighed a ton. The moment passed and her eyes grew their hard look again. It was the cold, unfeeling look I'd seen unwavering since the incident with Preston Jarvis and the horrors that came in the weeks that followed. It was the look that ultimately led us to commit our own unforgivable sin. "My head hurts, Daddy," she said in a small voice. "I know," I told her. "What were you doing?" "I had to get them out," she said. "What?" I asked. "The memories." Subscribe so you don't miss the rest of the story.